Hi, English 102. This is Jeff Holmes, part of your instructional team, with a quick video talking about assignment number 2. This is current arguments surrounding your topic. A couple goals for this assignment. First of all, we want you to continue the work that you started in assignment 1. In assignment 1, we asked you to focus a lot on the history of your particular topic. And in this assignment, we want you to think a little bit more about what is happening now, what contemporary arguments are, what people are saying sort of now. So current sources and current arguments are going to be key to this particular assignment. We also want you to start thinking a little bit more about how these various stakeholder groups and arguments are being made and how they're related to each other. So first of all, I highly recommend printing out a copy, reviewing the document that has the actual assignment in it. That'll answer a lot of questions that you might have up front as you're watching this video and as you're thinking about what you're going to start writing about. That document is going to be very important, so make sure you understand it pretty thoroughly. So this video is basically going to be just an example of something like what we're asking you to do. The other thing to start thinking about is at the end of this class, one of the requirements for your final project is that it's multimodal in some ways. That is, that you have writing but with something else. And you'll get more information about that in the coming weeks, but just start thinking about what kind of modes that you might want to create your final project in. This mode is a PowerPoint alternative called Prezi. It's a very good presentation tool for using graphics and text together in a kind of an interesting way. This is one potential way that you can think about starting to do your assignment number 3. So keep that in mind. You'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. So as an example of what we're asking you to do, let's say you have a topic, do violent video games cause violence? This is a pretty broad topic. Hopefully yours is a little more refined than this, but this is an example of the type of topic and type of question that people might be asking and might be generating a lot of different opinions and viewpoints and everything. So first of all, we have your topic selected. In assignment number 1, we asked you to think about the history of the topic. And again, this assignment, we want you to think a little bit more about what's happening currently. So the question of violence in video games is an old one. One of the first examples was a game called Death Race that was released in arcades in the mid-70s. People started talking about, well, you know, as you drive and kill people, does this promote people driving and killing in real life? You can see in this screen grab there's a little car in the middle, and way down in sort of the lower left there's a little person, and you had to hit this person as you were driving. So this is an old topic. It's been around a while. But people who are talking about the video game Death Race 35 years ago, 36 years ago now, we're saying different things. What's happened in the intervening years has changed the way the arguments are being made. So this is why we're asking you to think about what's happening now. So, for example, in the late 90s, during the Columbine massacre, it's actually 1999, not 96, a lot of people were talking about the fact that the 2 gunmen had played Doom a lot, and did this influence their, you know, actions and everything. So again, something that was happening, but that's still 13 years ago now. So we want you to think about the history, but again about what people are saying currently. So a game a little more current in Call of Duty Modern Warfare had the player potentially walking through an airport, killing civilians and stuff. So sort of the same concept, yet it's changed over time, not only because of the history, those other things that came in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but also about the ways that people think about what they do in video games and all kinds of other questions. So the history of your topic is going to influence what people are talking about today, and that's why we want you to focus on what's happening currently. So the first part of the assignment really is to define what counts as current for your particular topic. And this is going to be a little bit up to you and your understanding of the history, but we want to make sure that the sources that you're using in this assignment are current sources. So first of all, start thinking about what current means in terms of what you're talking about. So with the argument about violence in video games, we can start thinking about, well, what are some of the positions that people are taking now in light of this history of violence and the rhetoric surrounding violence in video games. Well, one argument is that violent video games promote violence in the real world. That is, that what happens in the game world transfers over to the real world. And a couple of potential stakeholders who hold this view, researchers in the American Psychological Association have, produced papers and research projects that suggest that stimuli in violent video games stimulate players to feel those same feelings in the real world. There are also other groups such as Mothers Against Video Game Addiction and Violence, who use slightly more anecdotal evidence to sort of push their cause. So you've identified these stakeholder groups as part of your previous work. Now we want you to start thinking about, why do these people think what they do? So why would researchers from the APA or Mothers Against Video Game Addiction and Violence say that violence in video games promotes violence in the real world? What evidence do they have that supports that sort of claim, and why do they think that it's important? That is, just because there's violence in a game and it causes violence in the real world, is that necessarily a bad thing? So we want you to start thinking about, these stakeholder groups are making an argument. What is the argument? What supports that argument? And what do the people themselves have to sort of believe in order to make that claim? So in this argument, a group that thinks that there's a correlate between violent video games and violent research have certain beliefs that they adhere to. What are those? Similarly, you can find groups that maybe suggest that violence in video games depends on the game itself, that when you enter a game world, you enter something else, a magic circle, some people might call it, and what happens in that game only makes sense within that game. So when that there is no such thing as sort of transference between the two spaces. A number of researchers have found this as sort of a compelling claim. People, National Endowment for the Humanities, MacArthur Foundation, researchers, a lot of gamers will tell you this. So there's a number of people who fall in this stakeholder group. Again, think about what it is that they have to believe about video games and about violence in order to make this claim. And then again, what sort of evidence do they bring to support that argument? You could also think about another stakeholder group that says violence in video games is much like a movie. It's there to tell some sort of narrative or story, and that sort of history of storytelling is protected free speech sort of activities. Some stakeholders who might fall into this sort of group, the Entertainment Software Association, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, First Rights Amendment proponents. This has been argued in front of the Supreme Court. So who would fall into this group? And again, what do they have to believe about this sort of argument? So part of what we're asking you when you're finding these contemporary sources is to start thinking about what kind of sort of ethical choices are these people making in order to make the argument that it is that they're making. The other real goal of this assignment is just to have you start thinking a little bit more about, well, how are these related to each other? So think a little more broadly about what this topic is. So it covers a lot of ground. Who's talking about it, and what are they talking about? For example, stakeholder group and stake 2 and 3 sort of believe that violence in video games doesn't transfer into the real world. But they make different arguments about that. They're related, so they're both saying that, well, no, it doesn't cause violence, but they make very different assumptions about why that is. Secondly, those groups fall into different categories. On one hand, you might have researchers or video game theorists or social scientists or something like that making that claim. On the other hand, you have the industry that represents the manufacturers of those games. They have different outcomes that they want. On the one hand, researchers may just want to sort of describe the world better. The other group may want to sell more games. They're coming to this argument with some purpose in making that argument. Think about what those purposes are and how they're related to each other. I hope this helps as you're putting together your notes and you're starting to think about what Project 2, what Assignment 2 is going to cover. If you have any questions, certainly feel free to ask us on Facebook or via email, and we'll answer them as best we can. Good luck and happy writing.